to your inevitable fall, my friend.
Reginald, let's just go.
Not until I finish my drink.
Come on, Tunde, her boss said, lifting his glass just high enough for half the ballroom to notice. Tell us the truth for once. How does it feel walking into rooms like this, knowing the woman beside you built her future while you just coasted behind her? A few people laughed too quickly, the kind of laughter that never comes from joy. It comes from relief. Relief that for one shining second, someone else is the target. My wife laughed too. Not loudly, not long, but long enough for me to feel it land. And that was the moment everything inside me went quiet, because what nobody in that ballroom knew, what the donors under those chandeliers, the trustees at the head table, and the man smirking in a tuxedo 3 seats away from my wife did not know, was that the entire legacy he had built his name on had been standing on my money. My silence, and a promise I made 12 years earlier. So I set my glass down, looked directly at him and said, "Laugh while you can, Desmond. By midnight, the building carrying your reputation will remember whose hands kept it standing." The ballroom fell still, but to understand why that sentence hit the room the way it did, you need to know who I was before that gala. And you need to know what silence can cost a man when the people he loves mistake it for weakness. My name is Tunde Adebayo. I was 42 that night, and for most of my life I believed something my grandfather used to tell me on hot evenings in Ibadan when the power would cut and the whole street would sit outside, waiting for the fans to breathe again. He used to say, "Real strength does not announce itself. It keeps roofs from falling while other people argue about the weather." I built my life on that sentence. I never cared much for rooms that rewarded noise. I was the kind of man people underestimated on sight because I did not wear success like a performance. I drove practical cars even when I could have bought louder ones. I wore clean, dark suits, not flashy ones. I kept my watches simple, my voice low, and my business mostly off my face. To people who measure men by how aggressively they introduce themselves, I always looked like background. My wife, Amara, was the opposite in the best possible way. Not shallow, not arrogant, just bright. She had the kind of intelligence that looked good in every room. She could stand in front of a board, a government panel, or a hall full of donors and make everyone feel as if the future had just become visible. She worked at the Kajani Hope Foundation, one of the most admired education charities in Lagos, an organization that built community schools, funded scholarships, and trained girls in underserved areas for careers their mothers had only been allowed to dream about. By the time this story begins, Amara had spent 10 years there and risen to Director of Strategic Programs. She was good at her job, better than good. She was the reason half their international donors renewed. She was the reason local families trusted the foundation enough to send their daughters into its programs. And I was proud of her, in a way I had never once felt the need to say loudly, because I assumed she already knew. That was my first mistake. 3 hours before Desmond opened his mouth at that gala, I was standing in our bedroom, fastening the cuff of a charcoal shirt, while Amara moved between the mirror and the wardrobe, deciding between 2 earrings. The room smelled faintly of her perfume and starch from the tailor's plastic cover draped over the dress she had picked up that afternoon. Emerald green, floor length, clean neckline. The kind of dress that did not beg for attention because it already understood what it was. She looked at me through the mirror and smiled. "You clean up well for a man who hates events." I smiled back. I do not hate events. I hate fake conversations with expensive lighting. She laughed, soft and easy then. "Save that face for the donors. Tonight matters." I knew it mattered. The Kajani Hope Annual Legacy Gala was not just another dinner. It was their biggest night of the year. New pledges, press coverage, board visibility, political guests. Old money families who only smiled fully when cameras were near them. It was the sort of night careers moved forward quietly, one introduction at a time. And this year mattered more, because Desmond Okoro, the foundation's celebrated executive director, had been hinting for weeks that Amara was finally about to be named deputy executive director. It was the promotion she had chased for 3 years. Desmond was one of those men who could speak about poverty over imported wine without ever looking embarrassed by the contradiction. Tall, polished, famous in nonprofit circles, always photographed from his good side. He knew how to sound like purpose. He also knew how to turn a room into a mirror and make everyone inside it admire him. I had met him several times before. Every time he asked what I did in that same smooth voice that sounded friendly until the second question came. And every time I gave him the short version: infrastructure advisory, community development, private holdings. Enough to be honest, not enough to entertain him. Men like Desmond hate a closed drawer. If they cannot place you, they start shrinking you. In the beginning, Amara used to defend me before I even noticed the slight. She would say, "Tunde works quietly, but he builds things that last." Or she would squeeze my hand under the table when Desmond smiled too long after asking a rude question disguised as curiosity. Then, little by little, she stopped. That was not one moment. It was a drift. The kind that happens in marriages when outside voices repeat themselves often enough to become background music. A joke here, a comparison there. Someone else's husband had made partner. Someone else's husband had just bought a second house in Lekki and would not stop posting about it. Someone else's husband sat on 2 public boards and gave interviews about leadership. I always came home. I always paid what needed paying. I always showed up. But because I did not narrate my own value, people with louder mouths started doing it for me. And somewhere along the way, the woman who used to know me better than anyone began listening. We drove to the gala just before sunset. Traffic was kinder than expected, and the city looked dipped in amber from the bridge. Amara rested one hand on her clutch and the other on the center console between us. She seemed nervous in that controlled way high achievers get when something important is within reach, but not yet named. "You know," she said, "if tonight goes the way I think it will, things may change a lot at work." "Then let them change," I said. "You earned that." She looked at me, maybe waiting for more, maybe wanting the bigger reaction. But I had always believed support did not need fireworks. I reached over and squeezed her hand at the red light. She smiled, then turned to the window. What I did not know then was that by the end of that night, she would learn I had been changing the fate of her organization for over a decade without ever asking for a seat in its spotlight. The gala was held at the Eco Convention Hall, transformed the way rich organizations like to transform public virtue into luxury. Gold tablecloths, tall centerpieces, soft stage lighting, string quartet near the entrance, giant screens cycling through photos of smiling children in uniforms paid for by donors who would later debate whether their names were printed large enough in the annual report. Amara was seated at the foundation table with senior leadership. I was at her side as her guest. Desmond sat on her other side, already glowing with attention before the first course had arrived. Across from us sat 2 trustees, one telecom investor, one retired judge, and a woman from a foreign grant agency who kept calling Lagos electric in that way visitors do when they mean chaotic, but want to sound charmed. The evening began the way such evenings always do, applause, speeches about impact, measured tears, photographs, pledges. Desmond worked the room with the confidence of a man who believed the institution and his image were the same thing. By the second course, the band had softened, the donors had loosened, and Desmond had started drinking like a man who thought his own reflection could hold him up. That is when he turned to me. "Tunde," he said, loud enough for the table beside us to hear, "I have to ask something I have wondered for years." Amara shifted in her chair before I answered. "Desmond, please." No, he said with a smile. "I am serious. We all know Amara is brilliant. We all know she carries rooms, raises money, closes partnerships. But you, my brother, remain a mystery. So tell us, what exactly do you do all day that has this woman working like a machine while you look so rested?" Laughter rippled around the table, light at first, testing itself. I smiled once, the kind of smile that lets a room know it has reached its warning line. "I work." Desmond leaned back. "Ah, yes, the famous secret work. Nigerian men love that one. Is it one of those jobs no one can explain but somehow still pays for cufflinks?" More laughter. The retired judge glanced down at his napkin. One trustee smiled into her glass. The telecom investor laughed hardest of all because cruel men love laughing at other cruel men. It makes them feel generous for not being the first to speak. I looked at Amara then, and she laughed. Just for a second, but it was not nervous. It was not defensive. It was the laugh of someone who had heard the joke before and no longer entirely disagreed with it. The room changed temperature for me in that instant. Desmond saw it too, and like all men who confuse attention for power, he pushed further. "Come now, Tunde," he said. "How does it feel attending a gala funded by women like your wife while pretending your quiet mystery is somehow noble? If we are being honest, every successful woman in this city seems to have one man following her around in expensive silence." That was the sentence. It was ugly enough on its own, but what cut deeper was not him. Men like Desmond exist everywhere. They do not surprise me. What cut me was hearing my wife exhale another little laugh and murmur, "Desmond, stop," while not actually wanting him to stop. I placed my fork down, slowly, deliberately. The kind of movement that tells the wise people in the room, the entertainment portion of the evening has just expired. Then I stood. I adjusted my jacket, looked first at Desmond, then at the trustees, then at the giant foundation logo behind the stage, the one that had sat under his name for years. And I said in the calmest voice I had used all week, "You should enjoy tonight, Desmond. Truly." Because by midnight, every plaque, brochure, and speech carrying your legacy is going to mean something very different. The institution you keep using as a mirror survives because I decided it should. Silence moved across the table, like fire catching cloth. Desmond blinked, then laughed too loudly. There it is. The mysterious man finally found a script. But he was less sure now. People can hear confidence breaking when they know what to listen for. One of the trustees, Mrs. Daramola, stared at me a second longer than everyone else. She was 70 if she was a day, and sharp enough to smell truth before most people realized the air had changed. "Tunde," she said quietly, "what are you saying?" I held her gaze. "I am saying the Foundation's Emergency Endowment Trust, the bridge fund that saved Kijani Hope 12 years ago, the land transfer that secured the Makoko Learning Campus, and the silent covenant protecting its payroll through the pandemic were not miracles. They were me." No one at that table moved. Amara's hand slipped off my sleeve like she had touched live current. Desmond's face did something I had not seen before. It stopped performing. That still was not the full truth. Not yet. But it was enough to crack the ceiling open. I left the ballroom before anyone found the right question. Amara caught me in the corridor just outside the hall, her heels striking the marble fast, her breath uneven in a way I had not heard in years. Tunde, Tunde, stop. I did not turn immediately. There are moments in a marriage where turning too quickly gives away more softness than the other person has earned. When I faced her, she looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but the certainty was gone from her face. "What did you mean in there?" she asked. "What did you just do?" I held her eyes and thought about 12 years of saying nothing because I believed love protected truth better than revelation ever could. Then I asked her a question instead. "When was the last time you looked at me and felt curious instead of convinced?" She flinched. "Tunde, do not do that. Answer me." So I did. 12 years ago, Kijani Hope was 6 weeks from shutting down. Their flagship donor pulled out. Construction on the Makoko Girls campus stalled. Their lenders were circling. Payroll was hanging by a thread. Desmond was not even executive director yet. He was still the polished young strategist who knew how to talk about vision, while older people handled the panic. I stepped in through a private structure, cleared the debt exposure, secured the land against seizure, and established a protected reserve nobody was allowed to touch without trustee approval. I did it anonymously because the founder asked me for 2 things: save the children, and do not turn the rescue into a monument to yourself. Amara stared at me like language itself had shifted. "That is not possible." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, because there it was, the line I had felt for years but never heard from her mouth with such clarity. Not, "Why didn't you tell me?" Not, "Is that true?" But, "That is not possible." As if my capacity had become unbelievable to her. "It is possible," I said. "It happened. And by morning, your board will have documents in front of them proving every word." She went pale under the hall lights. "Why would you hide something like that from me?" That question would have mattered more if she had asked it earlier, 3 years earlier, 5, 10. On the nights she saw numbers in accounts that did not match the story she had lazily accepted from other people. On the morning, she asked why I was taking calls from school principals in states she had never visited. On the weekend, she passed my study door and heard me discussing procurement delays on a campus she assumed I only donated to occasionally. She had touched pieces of the truth before. She never held them long. I looked at her and said, "I did not hide it from someone who wanted to know me. I kept it from people who preferred a simpler story." She said my name then, the way people do when they want mercy before apology. Tunde. But I was not angry in the way she feared. Anger burns hot. What I felt was colder and older than that. I felt the grief of a man realizing the woman he loved had been letting someone else define his weight for years. I left her there and walked into the night air. When I got home, I went straight to my study, unlocked the lower cabinet, and pulled out the black archive box I had not opened in almost 14 months. Inside it were the papers that had changed more lives than most speeches ever do. Original trust agreements, land transfers, endowment covenants, emergency financing records, internal compliance memos, audit flags. A quiet history of decisions that had kept Kijani Hope alive while louder people were busy being photographed beside it. And buried in that same box was another file, one I had never wanted to need. The truth is, I had not just kept the foundation alive. I had been preparing for its rescue from Desmond long before the gala. Because a year earlier, irregularities started appearing in the scholarship pipeline. Small amounts at first. Vendor invoices just below mandatory review thresholds. Media spend that seemed oddly padded. A training contract routed through a shell consultancy with directors connected to Desmond's cousin. Separate on paper, harmless in isolation. But patterns reveal character the way footprints reveal direction. I did not accuse him then. I watched. Silence is only weakness when it is empty. Mine never was. I called my attorney that night, a hard, precise woman named B.C. Alade, who had structured the original rescue with me 12 years earlier. She answered on the second ring. "I assume the gala finally happened," she said. "Yes." "Was it bad?" "Worse," I said, "but clearer." She exhaled once. "Do I release the board pack?" "Not yet," I said. "First, send the trustees the restricted endowment records, the bridge fund chain, and the beneficial control memorandum. Then add the preliminary audit findings on Desmond's procurement approvals. I want them awake before sunrise." There was a pause. "And Amara?" I looked toward the study door, thinking of the laughter at the table. "She will learn with the rest." I hung up and sat in the dark for a while with the box open in front of me, remembering the first night Kijani Hope became my responsibility. The founder's name was Mama Sade Ajiboye. She was the kind of woman who could make grown officials sit straighter without ever raising her voice. 12 years ago, she called me to a modest office with one working air conditioner and stacks of papers tied in string. She had already tried banks, ministers, major donors, and one billionaire whose assistant sent flowers instead of help. The foundation was dying, not because the mission was weak, but because goodness without structure gets eaten alive. She slid the papers toward me and said, "If this place goes under, 2,000 girls lose scholarships and 3 campuses close within 6 months. I do not need a savior, Tunde. I need someone disciplined enough not to confuse rescue with ego." That sentence stayed with me. I had money then, but not the kind newspapers write features about. My wealth was tied up in roads, schools, low-profile land plays, and long-arc investments people laughed at before they matured. I could have said no. I could have written one charitable check and walked away feeling generous. Instead, I spent 8 weeks rebuilding the financial skeleton of the institution from inside the shadows. I ring-fenced the educational assets, secured the land, funded the reserve, and inserted a silent control clause that activated only if executive mismanagement threatened the mission. That clause had Desmond's name all over it now. He did not know. Very few people did. Mama Shah died 4 years after we signed it, and before she passed, she took my hand in the hospital and said, "One day they may clap for the wrong man in my organization. Do not let applause confuse you. Protect the girls, then protect the truth." I had done the first part well. The second part was where my marriage had begun to fail. Amara came home just after midnight. I heard her pause outside the study, then enter without knocking. She was still in the green dress, but the glamour had fallen off it. There is a point in every long night when fabric stops looking elegant and starts looking tired. That dress had crossed the line. She looked at the documents spread across my desk and said nothing at first. Then she asked, "How much of my life have I not understood?" It was the first honest question of the night. "Enough," I said, "that we cannot fix this with one conversation." She stepped closer. "Tell me now." So I did, though not gently. I told her about the rescue structure, about the payroll guarantee during the pandemic when donors vanished, and I silently carried 9 months of operating costs because school cooks, drivers, and teachers should not lose salaries while executives discussed resilience on Zoom. I told her about the Makoko land dispute I ended by buying the adjacent parcels through a separate vehicle so developers could not choke the school out later. I told her about Desmond's compliance exposure and the ongoing audit. I told her that the board's ability to remove him by emergency vote existed because of a clause I paid lawyers to protect when no one else in the room believed collapse was possible. And finally, I told her the part that had nothing to do with the foundation. I said, "Do you remember 11 months ago when you asked why I missed your friend's birthday dinner because of a late site call?" She nodded slowly. That site call was a girls' dormitory roof collapse in Ogun State. No cameras, no press, no gala. 17 girls displaced, 3 injured, and a contractor trying to vanish before sunrise. I paid for emergency relocation, reconstruction, and hospital care that same night. When you got angry that I chose work over your dinner, I apologized because I did not want applause. But I watched you roll your eyes at me in the car, and I remember thinking, if I tell her the truth, will she hear sacrifice, or just another story she can test against Desmond's voice tomorrow? Amara sat down then, as if her knees had made a decision without her. Tunde, she whispered, why would you think that of me? I looked at her a long time before answering. Because you laughed tonight, and because it was not the first time you let him measure me out loud. That sentence broke something in the room. Tears came to her eyes, but I did not stop. There are nights when mercy arrives too early and turns into avoidance. Do you know what I kept telling myself for years? I asked. That you were tired, busy, stressed. That every little comment you let pass was just workplace poison you had not noticed bringing home. But poison that keeps entering a house eventually becomes furniture. You stopped defending me, Amara. Then you stopped wondering about me. Then you started agreeing with people who did not know the first thing about what kind of man I am. She covered her face with one hand and cried without sound for a moment. Then she said the words I think she had been hiding from herself the longest. 6 months ago, I almost left. The room went very still. I did not interrupt. Silence has a way of making the truth finish dressing itself. She swallowed hard. I did not have someone else. It was not like that. But I had started believing maybe I had outgrown this marriage. Maybe I was carrying more than you were. Maybe I needed a life that looked more equal from the outside. Desmond kept saying things, not directly at first, just small things. That a woman like me should not be explaining her husband to rooms. That people were starting to ask questions. That image matters when you lead. I hated hearing it. Then one day, I hated how much it sounded like thoughts I had already started thinking. She started crying harder then, ashamed now, not wounded. I opened a private account. I moved money into it, slowly. Not enough for you to notice right away. I told myself it was just security. But deep down, I was preparing for the idea that I might leave. I closed my eyes. In marriages, betrayal is not always another body. Sometimes it is another narrative. Another version of your partner fed to you by outsiders until you love the costume less and respect the person less. Sometimes that is worse, because it feels righteous while it is happening. How much? I asked quietly. Just over 14 million naira, she said. I kept telling myself I would explain if the time came. And when exactly does the time come to explain that to a husband who has spent years making sure your life stayed secure? I asked. She did not answer. I reached into the archive box and pulled out a single envelope. Cream paper. Old, slightly bent at the corner. What is that? She asked. The opportunity I never told you about. I handed it to her. It was an offer letter from a Dubai infrastructure consortium dated 9 years earlier. Triple compensation, regional authority, housing, equity participation. The kind of move that would have turned me into the kind of public success people like Desmond understand immediately. Amara read it once, then again. Her face changed. I turned it down because you had just been shortlisted for your biggest promotion at Kijani Hope. Relocating would have ended that path for you. I chose your trajectory without asking for gratitude because that is what marriage looked like to me then. 2 people protecting one another's futures. 3 weeks later, at your colleague's birthday dinner, you told someone I lacked ambition. One of their husbands repeated it to a mutual friend, and it came back to me. Her head snapped up. No. Yes, I said. I never confronted you because by then I had started understanding something ugly. You did not disrespect me in one dramatic act. You did it in drips. Tiny permissions, tiny silences, tiny public laugh lines, always small enough to defend, together large enough to drown a marriage. She broke then, fully. I did not raise my voice once that night. I did not need to. The truth had finally become heavier than tone. By 6 a.m., the first trustees had called. Mrs. Daramola spoke first. Her voice carried none of the softness old age sometimes brings. Mr. Adebayo, she said, I have gone through what your counsel sent. If these records are authentic, then Kajani Hope has been living inside your protection for over a decade while congratulating the wrong men in public. They are authentic, I said. And Desmond? The preliminary audit understates the problem, I said. Give BC 6 more hours and she will show you how scholarship funds were rerouted through preferred vendors and event budgets were inflated to skim cash under image contracts, consultancies, and campaign media buys. He built theft where people expected branding. By noon, the board called an emergency meeting. I arrived at Kajani Hope headquarters in Yaba just after 1. Not through the guest entrance. Through the side gate used by contractors and operations teams. The same gate I had used countless times on unannounced inspections, site reviews, and quiet visits nobody important ever noticed because they assumed important men only enter through glass. The building looked exactly as it always had. The same green signage. The same murals painted by scholarship students. The same reception desk where a smiling young woman once offered me visitor tea without the slightest idea I had helped keep the building from being auctioned years earlier. Only this time, every face that recognized me held uncertainty. Desmond was already in the boardroom when I walked in. He had not slept. You could see it in the carefulness of his collar. Men like him do not usually look frightened when the room is full. They look offended. Fear arrives as indignation first. He rose when I entered. Tunde, before this becomes a spectacle, I think there has been a misunderstanding. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the only empty chair left, and placed a leather folder in front of me. BC sat to my right. Mrs. Daramola sat to my left. Around us were trustees, outside counsel, one compliance specialist, and Nandi Maseko, the director of operations, a woman who had spent 7 years being the quiet adult in a building run by image addicts. No misunderstanding, I said. Just a delay. BC slid the documents across the table in order. Original Beneficial Control Memorandum, Endowment Authority Schedule, Covenant Trigger Clause, Pandemic Reserve Authorizations, Procurement Audit Summary, Vendor Relationship Map, Desmond's sign-off chain. You could feel power leaving the wrong man in real time. He tried first what men like him always try. He smiled sadly. I see. So this is personal. Because of what happened last night. Mrs. Daramola spoke before I could. Last night humiliated you, Desmond. These papers condemn you. He shifted tactics. Even if these structures exist, he said, the board was never meant to be blindsided by shadow governance. This is not how institutions should be run. I folded my hands. Institutions should also not be looted by men who turn charitable work into a wardrobe budget. Nandi looked down to hide a reaction. Desmond's jaw tightened. You cannot prove intent. BC did not even look up when she answered. We do not need to. We can prove diversion, conflict exposure, non-disclosed beneficiary ties, manipulated approvals, false external billing, and misuse of donor-restricted communications budgets. Intent is your spiritual problem. Governance is ours. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Nandi did something I will respect for the rest of my life. She opened her own folder and quietly placed 12 printed emails on the table. Procurement warnings, facility notes, internal questions she had raised over 2 years and watched disappear into Desmond's office without response. "I sent these repeatedly," she said. "I thought the foundation was just too proud to listen. I did not realize someone was protecting him from consequence." Desmond turned toward her as if betrayal were his to feel. "Nandi, be careful." She met his eyes without blinking. "No," she said, "you be careful. We answer to girls who trust this institution with their futures. You answer to mirrors." That was the moment the room stopped being his. The emergency vote took less time than his speeches usually did. Desmond Okoro was suspended immediately, pending forensic completion. His authority revoked. Devices retained, office access terminated. External communications frozen, pending board statement. He stood when the motion passed, but the posture was gone. He looked at me then with a mixture I had seen before, in men about to lose everything they confused with themselves. Resentment, disbelief, and one final childish hope that somebody more powerful might rescue them. "You set this up," he said. "No," I answered. "I built a net years ago in case someone like you mistook applause for immunity. You fell into it yourself." Security escorted him out through the corridor, where he had once paused to adjust his tie before donor photos. After he left, the board faced its second problem: a vacuum. The room turned to me with that dangerous hunger institutions get when they discover the quiet man in the corner has been carrying weight all along. They wanted me to take over visibly, chair the board, run strategy, become the new symbol. But symbols were what had failed them. So I said no. Then I nominated Nandi Maseko as interim executive director. Some objected immediately, which told me I had chosen correctly. "She is operations," one trustee said. "She lacks the external profile." "Exactly," I said, "which means she still knows the foundation exists for work, not lighting. She knows every campus, every facility issue, every real staff shortage, every delayed payment, every leaking pipe, every missing bus tire, every scholarship ledger. She knows what this institution is when the cameras leave. That is leadership." Nandi looked at me as if unsure whether to thank me or challenge me. Good leaders often hesitate before stepping into power because they still believe the work matters more than their image inside it. By the end of the meeting, she had the role. When I stepped outside, Amara was waiting in the corridor. She had not been invited into the boardroom, but she knew enough now to understand the world had shifted inside it. "Is he gone?" she asked. "Yes." "And Nandi?" "Interim executive director." A strange expression moved across her face. Not jealousy, not exactly. More like shame arriving through a side door. Nandi had been one of the few people at Kijani Hope who always treated me with quiet respect. Not because she knew my role, she didn't. Because she still believed men could be measured by consistency instead of theatrics. Amara leaned against the wall and said, "I do not know how to stand in front of you right now." "That made two of us," I said. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Are we finished?" I wish that question had been easier. Marriage is not a building that collapses in one dramatic minute. It weakens in hidden places. Hairline fractures, repeated water damage, neglected beams. Then one day someone asks if it can still be saved, and the only honest answer is that saving it will require far more than saying sorry over the rubble. I did not answer right away. Instead, I asked, "Do you want us saved, or do you want the shame to end?" She stared at me like I had opened the wrong wound. Then she whispered, "Both. But the first, one more." That was the most hopeful thing I had heard from her in months. Still, hope without truth is how we got here. So, over the next 2 weeks, the whole house changed. We spoke more honestly than we had in years. Not warmly at first, honestly. She told me about the nights Desmond would keep her back after meetings, under the excuse of strategy conversations, only to spend 30 minutes telling her that image matters in leadership and private life. That she needed a partner who could stand beside her publicly in ways that amplified her. That people notice everything. That donors notice wives and husbands. That women in power get judged by the men they marry. He never touched her. He never crossed that line. But he cultivated dissatisfaction like a gardener. And once planted, it grew because she let it. I told her things I should have told her earlier. About the schools. About the reserve structures. About how often I bit my tongue when she casually compared me to louder men. About the loneliness of loving someone who benefits daily from your labor while slowly growing less curious about your inner life. She admitted she had begun reading my quiet as passivity, my refusal to self-advertise as lack of scale, my privacy as distance. She said that after years in rooms built on visible ambition, she had forgotten how to recognize men who build without applause. That confession hurt because it was true. Then her mother called. Mama Ifeoma had never openly disrespected me, but she had a way of evaluating me with her silences. The way some elders do when they think a son-in-law is polite, but not particularly impressive. She called late one evening and asked if Amara was home. I told her yes, put her on speaker, and sat across from my wife at the dining table while the older woman spoke. "Tunde," she said, "before I say anything else, I want to tell you I have been wrong about you for years." Amara looked up sharply. Her mother continued, 3 years ago, when I had that surgery and the hospital waived balances I thought insurance had settled, it was not insurance, was it?" I said nothing. "It was you," she said. "I found out last month from a hospital administrator who recognized my name at a charity luncheon and thanked me for having such a generous son-in-law. I did not ask you because I did not want to know I had misjudged a man that badly." Amara covered her mouth. Mama Ifeoma kept going. "I told my daughter more than once that I worried she had married a man with a gentle heart but no hunger. I thought I was protecting her. Instead, I was teaching her to look past substance toward performance. That is my shame. There are apologies that heal because they arrive early, and there are apologies that merely witness damage already done. Hers was the second kind. Still, I respected that she offered it plainly." Amara cried after the call ended, not because her mother had spoken harshly, because for the first time she understood the full choir of outside voices she had let sing over her own knowledge of me. A week later, she handed me the details of the private account, every transfer, every date, every excuse she had told herself while making them. "I do not want any hidden exit between us anymore," she said. That sentence mattered more than the money. "I should tell you something else," I said. She looked up warily. "The night of the gala, before I left the foundation, I authorized a timed release package. If the board had refused to act, or if Desmond tried to bury the audit, every major donor, 3 education reporters, and 2 government oversight offices would have received the full compliance package, the control records, and enough proof to collapse his public career by breakfast." Amara stared at me. "Did you send it?" "No." "Why not?" I thought about that for a long second. Because there is a line between justice and revenge, and that night I could not trust my pain to know the difference. Also, because if I had done it the ugliest way possible, innocent staff and scholarship families would have suffered in the blast. I built the failsafe to protect the mission. But after hearing you laugh, I wanted to use it to wound. The fact that I recognize that in time is the only reason I still respect myself. She cried quietly after that. Not theatrical tears. The kind that come when the person across from you has just revealed how close he came to becoming harder than he already was. 3 months later, Kijani Hope held another event. Not a gala, a school expansion launch in Makoko. Open air, brighter sun, less perfume, more truth. Nandi had spent the 3 months doing what serious leaders do when they inherit a mess. She cleaned. She audited. She promoted people who had actually been carrying the work. She cut vanity budgets, restructured procurement, opened reporting channels, published delayed scholarship data, and brought program staff into rooms where strategy used to be performed over them rather than with them. The place felt different, lighter, less polished in the shallow way, more stable in the meaningful one. Amara was still there. She had not received the promotion Desmond once dangled in front of her, because that promotion under his regime had been another leash. Instead, Nandi asked her to rebuild the donor program from scratch with transparent reporting and direct school accountability. Harder work, better work, real work. I arrived late on purpose and stood at the back for a while before anyone noticed me. Children were laughing near the new library wing. Teachers were arranging chairs. The painted sign near the entrance carried no donor vanity name now, only the words Kijani Learning Campus, and beneath it, for every girl who was told to wait. That line was Nandi's. I liked her more every time she spoke. When the short ceremony ended, she called me forward unexpectedly. "This campus stands today because some people gave publicly," she said into the microphone, "and because one man chose for years to give privately without demanding ownership of the story. We are not naming this place after him because he would hate that, but we are going to tell the truth. Once. Mr. Tunde Adebayo, thank you for helping build a future you never asked us to applaud." The applause that followed felt different from gala applause, less polished, more earned. I went up, said almost nothing, and stepped down. Because the sweetest kind of vindication is not making a room gasp. It is watching the right people finally understand what mattered all along. After the event, Amara and I stayed behind while staff packed chairs. The lagoon air carried that mix of water, dust, diesel, and possibility unique to places still being built. She stood beside me in a plain navy dress. No camera smile this time, no donor performance, just herself. "I owe you a life of apologies," she said quietly. "No," I said, "you owe me a life of truth if we are going to remain married. Apologies are moments. Truth is structure." She nodded and took that in, the way people take medicine they did not expect to need. Then she said, "I loved what you did for years. I benefited from it. I was protected by it. But I stopped respecting what I did not understand because I became addicted to visible ambition. I let another man narrate you to me because his version was easier to compare inside the rooms I cared about. I do not ever want to become that woman again." That was the first apology that actually reached me, not because it was dramatic, because it was precise. We did not fix everything that day. Real marriages are not healed by one speech and one embrace under pretty lighting. Trust returns the way strong buildings are repaired, beam by beam, fastener by fastener, inspection after inspection. But we began. And beginning honestly is rarer than people think. In the months that followed, our house changed in ways outsiders would never notice. She asked questions now and waited for answers. Actual answers, not summary versions she could fit between emails. I stopped carrying entire worlds alone out of habit and started telling her when something mattered, when something burdened me, when something frightened me, when a project was in trouble, when a school needed emergency support, when a legal structure was under review, when I felt my old instinct to close up and disappear into competence again. We began having Sunday dinners with fewer phones on the table. We began disagreeing earlier instead of storing resentment in polite drawers. We began naming the third people in our marriage before they had a chance to unpack their bags. Colleagues, friends, mothers, expectations, public image. All the invisible guests couples pretend are not eating at the table with them. One night, about 5 months after the gala, I took the timed release file off my encrypted drive and opened it one last time. Every document was still there, every audit trail, every record I had nearly used to burn everything down. Amara came into the study and saw it on the screen. "Are you sending it?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "I am deciding whether I still need a weapon to feel safe in my own marriage." She stood there a moment, then answered with more wisdom than I had expected. "Maybe not a weapon, but I understand why you built proof." That mattered too. Because healing does not mean pretending the wound was small. It means finally becoming trustworthy enough that proof can rest without being used. I deleted the live release schedule that night. Not the records. I am too disciplined for fantasy. But the countdown, the trigger, the part of me that still needed catastrophe waiting in the corner like a guard dog. I let that go. Amara watched me do it. Then she put both arms around me and cried into my shoulder the way only people cry when relief finally arrives after shame has exhausted itself. Not because she had won me back, not because everything was perfect, but because the future no longer needed to be negotiated through secrets. If you are still listening to me now, then let me tell you the truth this story left me with. Respect does not die only when people insult you openly. Sometimes it dies when the person closest to you stops being interested in the full weight of your life. Sometimes it dies when your sacrifices become infrastructure, so familiar nobody sees them anymore. And sometimes it dies when outsiders are allowed to narrate your worth, because the people who love you have gotten lazy with gratitude. But here is the other truth. Silence can be dignified, yes. Silence can build. Silence can protect. Silence can carry families through years no one else even notices. But silence without witness becomes a hiding place, and hiding places eventually fill with misunderstanding. If you are married, do not wait for public humiliation to discover what your partner has been carrying quietly. Ask now. If you are loved, do not assume provision explains itself. Speak now. And if you are in a room where someone disrespects the person you chose, do not ever laugh just to keep the table comfortable. Some laughs cost more than affairs. They tell the room where your loyalty ends. As for Desmond, the forensic review finished 2 months later. The board referred the file out, and the press never got the version he would have preferred. Not because I destroyed him personally, because the truth finally met structure. And structure does what emotion often cannot. It lasts. It records. It names. It removes. As for Nandi, she kept the role. Of course she did. 6 months into her leadership, scholarship renewals were up, overhead leakage was down, and for the first time in years, the Foundation's annual impact report read like a document written by adults instead of a vanity brochure. I invested again, quietly through the trust. Not because I believed in institutions automatically, but because I believed in what serious hands can do with them once the performers leave. And as for Amara and me, we are still married. Not magically, not effortlessly.
Not because love alone solved everything.
We are still married because after all the elegance burned off, we chose to become honest enough to deserve another try. Some nights we sit on the back terrace after dinner and say nothing for a while, listening to the city soften. The old version of our silence used to mean assumption, distance, unasked questions, untested stories. Now it means something else. Now it means there is finally enough truth in the house that quiet no longer has to do all the work. If this story hit you, drop a yes in the comments if you believe respect matters more than appearances, or drop a no if you think silence creates its own kind of damage. And if you have ever seen someone get underestimated because they did not advertise themselves loudly enough, subscribe, because the next story might feel even closer to home.